Thank you.
Thank you. And isn't it wonderful hearing people from all around Australia, what everyone's doing, eh? All these people are changing the world. It's very important.
As are you.
As are you, yeah.
Oh,
Thank you, Jessica.
as are you.
Yeah, and you all.
We should all give each other a hug. Now listen, I'm a health professional, right? So we all know ABC. Isn't it like CPR or, you know, all those silly acronyms, eh? So let's make one up. ABC. Okay, we'll go in reverse. Let's say C is for cannabis. Yay! But let's make this more interesting. On your way home, go by Moreland Hospital and have a look at their cannabis museum there. Please don't tell them because they'll get rid of it as soon as they realise what's happened, okay? At the reception, they've got the Cannadonna cigarettes there, which is an Australian invention. Please don't tell them because I don't want them to remove it, okay? But you can photograph it. And what's Cannadonna used for? Oh, for asthma. You're meant to smoke it as soon as you get acute asthma breathing problems because it opens your airways. Isn't that awesome? It's got belladonna in it too. But anyway, that's the C. B is for breathing. Well, I think we just covered that. We all need to take a big, deep breath in. It's almost 4:20, so we'll all be inhaling soon. And the A, I suppose, is for Andrew. Or is it for Australia? Well, he's one and both, because he's changing the world, eh? No, well, that's Oi. That's O. Yeah, anyway, we're back to A. So I want this man who's got the finger on the pulse, and we're going to learn all about it. And Michael, well, he doesn't start with an A. So, do you want to talk, Michael?
Yeah,
you can. Okay.
A little bit, anyway.
Chat away.
Okay, I got the first mic. So, by chance, I'm president and he's secretary of the hemp party, but we're not here to push that. It's like we managed to get registered federally because they allowed us to register online, and we can't register state-wise. Look, the paranoia in the cannabis world is huge, you realise. So, you know, when you've got to submit all the names to get registered, and then they ring up to check you're not making up people. They ring up and they say, "Oh, John Thomas, is that you? We want to check you're a member of the hemp party." People go, "No, not here, mate, not here." So it's like this huge thing we're up against a lot, and it's interesting. Anyway, Andrew and I have been here part of the hemp party for 20 years, hemp embassy for most of 20 years, and he's got much more knowledge on what's happening at government levels than me. True, eh?
Well, yeah, getting an understanding of what governments are saying and what they can and can't do under the international laws. I mean, this is cannabis is, you know, no matter what we think, how benign it is or whatever, it's got its own special laws at the international level. And so understanding them is a tricky part, and how they relate to federal governments around the world and even the state governments. A really good example is the hemp seed food, or growing hemp even. It was still illegal to grow hemp commercially here in Australia till 2000, in New South Wales till 2008. It was only last year that we were allowed to have it for human consumption, whereas the international rules say that these international drug treaties do not apply to hemp. And the truth is that most of the world didn't stop growing hemp. It was only the allied countries, China, India, all the Iron Curtain countries, Russia, Ukraine, they never stopped. It was just the allied countries. And then the other anomalies were you had a couple of conquered countries, Korea and Japan, that got special exemptions from the US government to keep growing a little bit of hemp. So yeah, we're all quite surprised at the very slow pace of Australia picking up the hemp seed food thing. But what I can say is that in the background, there was, for 8 years, you had police from all over the country running a concerted effort to stop hemp seed food being allowed to be consumed in Australia, because they were saying it would interfere with the saliva testing regime. And then we also realised that we're the only country doing saliva testing. So when you look into it at the kind of, at the bureaucratic level and legislative level, there's all these anomalies that come up. And what it does show us that people and companies, countries have worked out how to make money from prohibition, not in the effect of selling drugs or selling cannabis, the other side of it, be it private prisons, rehab clinics and rehab industry, and even, like more recently, people who want to promote, saliva testing.
Yeah, in short, there's heaps of money to be made out of prohibition. The jails are privatised in America. The biggest opponents to changing the law in America were the Jail Guards Union,
Yep.
which is it's just about money, which is really interesting. And the hemp seed thing, what Andrew's just saying, the police kept hemp seed, stopped us eating it for years, and now, I carry a packet of hemp seed in the car and you tell the cops, I'm eating hemp seed. No, that doesn't interfere with your saliva. So it's just an example of how you've got to trust yourself and think things out for yourself, because we have been lied to about pot, and taken me a long time to understand why. And the reason why is because it really is an extraordinary medicine and a unique plant, good for so much stuff. Its unique properties of fast-growing, long, strong, flexible fibre, amazing seed, amazing properties in the seed, and now this fantastic medicine. So I think I told people before, did I? For thousands of years in India, it was called God's gift. This is the amazing plant, and it's made illegal just because of money interests, be it the pharmaceutical industry or the petrochemical industry. And Andrew's been at the he got the licences to grow and export and import, and now he's involved with the company on a commercial level. And the big thing that interests me is, what are the implications of Canada have just announced they're going to regulate cannabis. Anybody can grow 4 plants or carry 30 grams. So this is a Commonwealth country. What about us?
That's the big one. It's not just recently, but the Trudeau party, they went to the last election saying that if we get voted in, we're going to regulate recreational use of cannabis. We're going to tax it and regulate it. They won, and have slowly taken their time to do it. But you've got to pick up the little snippets, and not long after they got elected, they said, we mightn't be able to do this because it's going to interfere with our obligations under the UN drug treaties. Now, the recreational use of cannabis is the holy grail. The non-medical use of any drugs is what the binding part of the UN drug treaties are. So I gave the long rave yesterday, but in short, and just specifically around Canada, they have a medical cannabis regime, but under the government didn't want to do it. The government was forced to do it under the Bill of Rights, so the High Court ordered the government to introduce a medical cannabis regime back in 2002, the Allard Wilcox case. And since then, successive Canadian governments have fought at the court level any kind of progress. I was there in 2015, and the government had lost another High Court challenge, where the government was insisting that if you want to use cannabis for medical purposes, you have to smoke it. You can't use it any other way, you have to smoke it. The court found if there's a safer way to use it, you should be able to. So they started doing the extractions, and this is the kind of things that are coming into Australia now. But so it was forced on them, but with this with the recreational, they took that to the election, they won. They raised a few concerns themselves, but in the end, the government sat down and developed a regulated approach to recreational use of cannabis. So they didn't just, decide it like that. They actually wrote down a full dossier on it, and they presented it at the United Nations. And in fact, you've got the United Nations and the General Assembly, and then off to the side you've got this other group called the International Narcotic Control Board, the INCB. They're the ones who administer all the drug treaties. So there was a meeting that the INCB had a couple of years ago, and it was titled "A Drug-Free World, We Can Do It." But at that conference, or at that meeting, Canadian government tabled what they were going to do. They never got a response, but in May this year, the UN has again warned Canada against regulating recreational use of cannabis. So the focus for us should be, I feel, especially in terms of the medical cannabis debate, that we should be looking at after October 1st, when they're due to allow it. I think that, if there is no international consequences for the Canadians, if nothing happens, there's a very good reason for Australia to move forward to develop some kind of interim measures around medical cannabis use until, you know, I still think in the long run pharmaceuticalised cannabinoid medicines prescribed by a doctor will be the way. Maybe it might be 20 or 30 years away, but I think that's the kind of time frame we're looking at. So yeah, really interesting. It should play a bearing. I hope that, you know, as a movement, especially other high-profile cannabis advocates really point to that and have that, you know, have the media take that issue up and ask governments, well, if they're allowed to do, if Canada's allowed to do recreational, nothing happened, why shouldn't the Australian government adopt a medical cannabis regime and just tell the UN this is what we're doing? Now, the consequences, who knows? What we do know is that we just recently found out the other Friday is that the INCB has been set up to not be influenced by politics. So, you know, it really is a statutory body, United Nations body out there that really is on its own. Its job is to administer the drug treaties. The payoff for all the governments in the world is that there'll be an even distribution of all the drugs, bearing in mind that no government owns any drugs. All drugs are owned by companies. Insulin, the whole lot. And they can turn on the tap on and off and turn it on as hard as they want. They have a link, they have a pipeline into every government's GDP through their health budget, through their PBS. It's not just Australia that pays huge PBS subsidies, it's all over the world. So, you know, these companies, when we talk about big pharma, it's not these companies that are on the Australian Stock Exchange or other stock exchanges calling themselves medical cannabis companies. They are not big pharma. Big pharma, you'll find, if you just Google top 200 entities of the world, you'll find those companies there, and they have more money than most countries. So,
I heard that they were also, in addition to what Michael said, one of the big anti-lobbyists of cannabis.
oh, absolutely, yeah. They want to maintain the prohibition. They own all the drugs, yeah, basically, yeah.
I'll tell you an example of that. I read when Obamacare was being debated in America, for every senator in Washington, there were 2 full-time pharmaceutical, or 22 full-time pharmaceutical lobbyists. So there's so much money in it. Another thing that I realised, like, it's so much better pain relief than opioids because of the side effects, which we actually enjoy, whereas the side effects of opiates really knock you around. So, and that and the chemotherapy industry, their profits are completely threatened. It's a huge, they are standing to lose a lot of money and they're fighting tooth and nail. And it's a kind of a sick business because it's all about who's going to make the money out of our pain. So it's a cause worth fighting for.
Yeah, it certainly is, and it'll keep going. The biggest fear for us is that Australians will believe the headlines that, you know, medical cannabis is legal in Australia. It's not. They're a long, long way off it. It's, you know, I mean, the fact is, and if you know, people should look at this. You know, we wish we could get these questions on fact checks and stuff on ABC, but the fact is, there is no government in the world that has willingly introduced a meaningful medical cannabis regime. That just hasn't happened. Even in Israel, it's not a meaningful regime over there. Doctors do not prescribe. A doctor at best will do a recommendation that will go to the health department. You'll get the okay from this committee of the health department, and then you go to one of the 6 licensed growers in Israel and you explain to the grower your medical condition, and the grower decides what cannabis, what strain you're going to use and how you're going to use it, whether you're going to smoke it or you know, they might have a preparation for you. So it really is quite extraordinary. Yeah, as I said, I hope people don't believe that medical cannabis is legal in Australia. I think that we really have to keep the pressure on, and we'll know that we're closer when the government starts talking about the real issues, which they have. If you know, anyone who chooses to read any of our final reports or even evidence presented in various parliamentary inquiries we've had here in Australia, you know, there is evidence always presented, and there's always outcomes in the conclusions that there are international obstacles for anyone seeking to secure or source a lawful source of cannabis for medical and scientific research. So, you know, if you're one of these research bodies and you want cannabis to do some research on, you know, why would a company give you that cannabis to use to develop a product when they own it. They don't need you. It's as simple as that, basically. I use the analogy of trying to grow opium or coca for medical purposes. These are both two more drugs which are approved for medical use, but those genetics are owned. You know, in Australia we have Johnson & Johnson and GlaxoSmithKline that contract Australian farmers to grow over half the world's opium, legal opium. And, you know, the whole thing is just irrational because, look, another article in the UN Drug Convention says that in recognition of poppies and opium coming from the Middle East, they have the 80-20 rule, and it says 80% of the world's opium, legal opium, will be grown in India and Turkey. Well, how can it be that two foreign companies are growing half the world's opium in Australia? So even our government, in its administration of the Act, of the UN drug treaties, is flawed. There is just so many questions to be answered on this. And then in terms of pain relief, you know, we are sitting here as privileged white folk trying to get medical cannabis into Australia. Look, white Western countries use 94% of the lawful pain relief in the world. We were already, until the other month, we could buy codeine over the counter. You try and go to the Middle East or a lot of these third world countries, you can't simply afford to buy opiates over there for pain relief. Let alone, I mean, anyone who's gone to the Middle East with OxyContin or other drugs, there's big warnings. You have to take your prescription, you have to take your doctor's certificate. These drugs have been so tabooed that you know, whole criminal justice systems have been built up around that prohibition. So yeah, it's extraordinary. There's nothing rational about it.
Except for money. You can only explain it with money.
It always comes down to money, you know. As a hemp seed food company, so I have two primary companies, Vita Hemp, which is a hemp seed food company, and Medical Cannabis Limited. So my company, Vita Hemp, you know, we wanted to know why our company couldn't get going. So we had a look at what the obstacles were, and we found a company down in Victoria that has exclusive rights to supply all the Australian police forces with these saliva tests. They've never been required to bring up any studies or any research about how they would work, but it's been police through police funding or through Victoria Roads funding that has paid for all this research. So we found that, you know, we've got a problem here. My company can't make money because of your company, but how did your company get going? You've got these dodgy products. No one else in the world wants to use them. The international report said that your devices are dodgy, they're unreliable and can't be recommended. We've tried them. Our road fatalities have gone up. You promised they'd go down. And the one thing that, through the hemp embassy, that we warned the government prior to introduction, and it was quoted in parliamentary briefings here in New South Wales, was that it would alter drug use trends. And that's what's happened. People are taking other drugs that aren't being tested for, or are like alcohol and, you know, speed. I mean, they are poisons. You can time how long your body takes to get rid of alcohol or ice or other drugs, chemical drugs like that. And then there's a whole raft of other drugs that they aren't even testing for, but statistically the police have used. It's been a boon for them. They've centred their, in New South Wales, they've centred their saliva testing up here in northern New South Wales. And if you see a graph of, you know, northern New South Wales, there's been this many detections, and we go down here, North Sydney and eastern suburbs of Sydney, they're right down here. Apparently there's no drugs being used there, but it's the concentration. And cannabis is, you know, between sniffer dogs and saliva testing, they really have unfairly targeted cannabis users.
In northern New South Wales.
Oh yeah,
well, they've got 100,000 tests they've got to use every year.
200,000. They've just done a deal for 200,000 in 2018. New South Wales. That's $10 million straight to PathTech Diagnostics in Victoria alone, just
supplying
from New South Wales.
the 20 cent sticks.
Yeah.
At $49 each.
Yeah.
Is it compulsory to do 2 tests or 1?
Yeah, one is compulsory. If you fail the first one, you have to do the second one.
No, like they do alcohol first and then cannabis?
No, not compulsory at all. They can randomly choose whenever they like.
They can do whatever they like. When you're out in the streets with the cops, there's not much you can really argue with. And you know, I mean, cops are getting the direction. You've got to use more of these devices. You know, they're allocating the time. The what do they call them? The the operations, yeah, they're all around using more and more of these devices. And, you know, I mean, it just really is, you know, there's no way such a big black market could happen under a prohibition if there wasn't lots of corruption. It's just like alcohol prohibition. Everyone said they could get rid of it. The police, to the very last day, were saying, give us more money, we'll get rid of it. All these, you know, local governments and mayors and, you know, everyone was saying, yeah, alcohol prohibition is working. But, you know, we see now, there was Al Capone's and there was... Look, all of this corruption is happening around cannabis. It's right under our noses. It always has been, but no one really wants to take it on. I mean, myself personally, I've tried to... Well, I've been too scared to take on these corruption claims. I've raised it a couple of times, but you just get shouted down. And, you know, I think, you know, the best advice from any successful whistleblower, there was one more recently, probably 3-4 years ago in New South Wales, and this cop, you know, he came clean and whistle blew on a couple of things, and at the end of it all, his life was shattered. You know, he was gone. He'd lost everything. And they said, have you got any advice for any other public servant about whistleblowing? He said, don't do it. It's just not worth it.
And yet the Australian police have had a few crime and misconduct commissions. They're
Sure.
not legitimately clean.
Sure, sure. I mean, we've had royal commissions here in New South Wales, specifically on the corruption in New South Wales Police. And in fact, I've gone back over that more recently and got 4 pages of comments from Commissioner Woods about the kind of problems we're going to walk into now if governments don't hurry up and do something about medical cannabis. I mean, we're at that next level. We you know, part of this maturing of the debate, we should be talking about the negative consequences if governments don't hurry up and do this. And in terms of police and corruption discretion, I mean, the Woods Royal Commission was very clear: do not give police discretion on prostitution, gambling and drugs. They legalised prostitution, they've legalised gambling, and now we're looking at giving police discretion on the use of medical cannabis. Like, really, are they going to be trained as medical professionals to be able to diagnose somebody at their front door or driving? The whole temptation of corruption, the being forced to uphold these laws or enforce laws that the government, that the public don't support. They ran into this with gay rights as well, and these are just unjust laws that police will fight to the very end. There was cops, and let's not make any bones about it, they were belting gays around Oxford Street and Darlinghurst to the very end. While the law was still illegal, they could do that, and even if and there's still a lot of gay folk who are still in the closet. They've lived their whole life like that, and they won't come out. We'll find the same with cannabis.
Andrew, I find the police traumatising.
They are.
They're not about peace and keeping the law. You know, when they raided my house, it took me 2 weeks before I even had the heart to even tidy up the mess.
Yeah.
They just totally traumatised the house, let alone me.
Yeah, trauma.
They're not about peace.
It's a bully culture.
Oh yeah, I mean, they want to shock and awe you when they come to your door with the dozen cops. They want that to be... Yeah. People in Australia, you've got to understand, we might have 1-2 million people smoking cannabis every day. They're not scared of breaking the law. They're scared of getting caught by the police. And what happens after that, your life goes to shit, depending on your life circumstances. You lose your job, or your family, friends, workmates find out about it. Insurance, all these things happen because you've got this one record for something that lots of people are doing all over the world, more and more. So we are in a transition. I mean, I think it's safe to say we're not ignoring it now. We're in a transition, but it's going to take a long time and a lot of sustained push by the public on this, because, you know, tinkering with a prohibition doesn't always work. I use the example of Portugal. People talk about, we've got a whole string of Australian politicians that have been to Portugal and we should decriminalise drugs and blah, blah, blah. Well, no, I had a look at a more detailed look at what was going on, and I've had now 2 first-hand accounts from people from Portugal. And the first one was a guy who came to Nimbin and he said, guys, he came to the embassy, I've got to tell you what's actually happening. And he stopped us so we could listen to what he was saying. He said, I can be walking down the street in Lisbon, a cop can drive by, can suspect that I'm carrying cannabis, it can stop me, search me. If they find some grams of cannabis on me, I can end up in jail overnight, I can be in rehab in the morning, but I didn't get a criminal record because they've decriminalised it. But they've increased the penalties for supply and production. Their rehabilitation budget is over $500 million now. I mean, it's a whole industry. You know, trying to rehabilitate a long-term cannabis user is just outrageous. But, you know, they've taken the worst parts of a prohibition. Under prohibition of alcohol in the US, it wasn't an offence to consume alcohol, it was an offence to manufacture and supply it. We've got the same thing going on in Portugal now. And look, in Canada, the same. They're on the verge of doing recreational, but the Canadian police have worked out a way that they're going to get an increase in their budget to enforce the regulated cannabis approach, because they've introduced 40 new laws around cannabis. So if you get caught with more than 30 grams, or if you get caught selling your mate a couple of ounces, or if you get caught with 5 plants, the penalties are immeasurable, are huge. So we don't know how that will pan out. We know the California model is much the same, where money that's being made from the regulated use of cannabis is being put into keeping a prohibition going on somebody growing a bit of extra or selling some to a mate or something like that. It's just outrageous. Yeah.
We always had this dream here of a cottage industry. I think some of you heard us talk about it yesterday. Because there are literally thousands of people across Australia making medicine, growing their own medicine, maybe disabled, maybe got a sickness, but this is what they're good at. License them to actually supply, you know. I actually think better to supply 1,000 kilos of cannabis rather than a number of plants, because people just grow massive plants and fertilise them, and it should be organic. I'm a big fan of organics. And employment. So there's a massive opportunity for employment out there if governments will go to a cottage industry model. But the pressure to just license the handful of giant big pharmaceutical companies like Andrew's talking about, that's the huge pressure. And it's really it's the same old marketplace as Bunnings has closed down the local hardware stores. It's a big fight over who's going to control the industry. And Colorado gave them a sniff of how much money is in cannabis, and I think everyone got a shock. We weren't surprised, but everyone else was like, right.
Just quickly on the Canadian thing too, like on the American thing, the different states, as I mentioned, with Canada, they didn't want the Canadian government didn't want the medical cannabis thing going. It was ordered by the government. In the US, in all those states, under the US Constitution, all but 16 states have access to citizens-initiated referendums. So in 1996, there was a guy called Dennis Perron. He used that in California, and he got a petition together and got enough signatures on it that made the medical cannabis issue, created a referendum question in 1996. What's important to know is that the Californian government ran the No campaign, and every one of those state governments where medical cannabis is legal in Canada, in the US, they all ran a No campaign, and it's still illegal at the federal level. So we've got the citizens initiated a referendum. They've got these small little, relatively, within their borders, these medical cannabis regimes, nothing really to do with the doctor. It's more an exemption from the health department to smoke high THC cannabis. That's another really important thing, the distinction between, when we talk about medical cannabis, have a close look at what's going on overseas, and it's primarily an exemption from a health department to smoke high THC cannabis. It's not a prescription from a doctor. In fact, there is no products in the world that a doctor can prescribe. They haven't been developed. There is no doctor writing prescriptions in the US or Canada or Israel where you go to your chemist and get it filled. That's not happening. It doesn't matter that Malcolm Turnbull's saying you can go to your GP now and get a prescription. That's not how it works. That's not how it works, and nor that's how it works in other countries. But yeah, important to note that all those governments, those state governments, ran the No campaign. It's still illegal federally. You can be, 3 or 4 states all in a row. They've all got legal medical cannabis regimes. You can't cross a border with anything. Cross a border, that's a federal offence.
We have no Bill of Rights in Australia. That's the difference. We don't get to have a say. And it's a huge difference. And I went to Vancouver year before last, and then across the border into Washington State and Oregon, where they've had legal pot. That's just north of California. And it was seriously good education. It's just no big deal.
Yep.
The shops are there, people in suits are lining up with a bottle of wine under one arm and they're buying a ready rolled joint. There's 100 different strains you can choose from. It's all been tested for any poisons or toxins. So you know exactly what strength it is. It's written on the bottle, how much THC, often how much CBD. So imagine now you go in to buy alcohol and you've got no idea what strength it is. Old moonshine days. That's where cannabis is at in Australia now. So over there, when you see the dispensaries, it's just like a kind of a clean chemist shop. And they're just selling jars of weed and resins and CBD and it's just, you know, a unique medicine and incredibly popular. And the big thing that's changed over there is once they got it into the public forum, all the fears started dissipating. And every year now the people wanting full regulation of cannabis in America, the stats change 5% every year. It's like 65% of people in America now say, yeah, we're ready, you know, we've been hoaxed, we've been lied to, we're ready to regulate this. And they've seen how it helps with alcohol, opiate addiction, which is huge in America, car accidents, violence, all those figures are down. And of course arrest rates and jail figures. Some states have started letting people out of jail. So, you know, it's great to be a part of this, and you guys are part of it. We're on the brink of a massive change. It's a big part of change on the whole planet.
Yep.
I was just going to make a quick comment. I read recently that Bayer or GlaxoSmithKline, I think it was Bayer, got fined $9 million for falsely misleading advertising and researching about the opiates being not addictive, like the OxyContin.
Yeah.
But what's a $9 million fine?
They just
when they're
lie.
making $360 million, you know? It's like,
No, these big pharma, they have, if you can Google it, they have a whole string of criminal offences and fines that they've
but
paid.
there's no discipline.
No, they just pay a fine, and a lot of that time it can be factored into the development of a new drug. Yeah, it's often talked about, but yeah, and it's just so simple for them to, you know, up the price of a drug. So that's what they hold over governments. They own the drugs.
Andrew, what's New Zealand doing? Are they anywhere ahead of us?
Look, to an extent, they're bending some rules and bringing some products in from Canada, just as we are here in Australia. But these products that they're bringing in are really substandard compared to medical cannabis. They're bringing in the first wave of pharmaceuticalised cannabinoid medicines that haven't been clinically trialled. They're made by companies, you know, in Canada generally that aren't internationally recognised, but because of the situation that they were born under in their country, and the immense amount of pressure that has been put on to politicians all around the world. You've got Current Affair and 7:30 Report. Almost weekly now we have a medical cannabis story of another patient who's doing well by using cannabis, or their father or someone's got caught, and, you know, this is really unfair. So, you know, we've got politicians responding to media like that, but don't forget politicians come and go, and all their job is to just keep people voting for them to stay in. Medical cannabis is beyond politicians. The politicians come and go. Cannabis will always remain illegal until it's addressed at that federal or international level. So politicians have bent some rules and let some stuff in. You've got, you know, I highlight there's a company in Britain, GW Pharmaceuticals, that the British government broke all the rules to let one company access illegal seed, magicked it into a lawful source and let them float on the stock exchange and make a company, and they eventually made a spray called Sativex. Well, I know for a minimum the last 15 years, whenever the medical cannabis debate comes up in Australia, there'll be a politician that comes up and goes, we're going to do a clinical trial on Sativex. That's been happening all over the world. Governments all over the world have now used that product to say, yeah, we're going to legalise medical cannabis, we're going to do a clinical trial on this. Or more recently...
That should be on the PBS.
Yeah. Well, no, the Novartis wants it to go on the PBS. It's $250 for a 5.5ml bottle. We know it's a complete waste of time. In fact, parliamentary inquiries have found that the product isn't as good as what it should be. It's very expensive. and not cost effective, so it won't go on the PBS. But Novartis, they have the distribution rights for Oceania. They would love for it to go on the PBS. But, you know, these clinical trials that they report to do around the country, around the world, I mean, this is a substandard product. So if they're going to use that on a clinical trial for chemo or something, of course it's going to fail. And the government will rightly be able to say, you know, this failed. By extension, medical cannabis doesn't work. You've got, you know, in the US, you've got Bayer with GW Pharmaceuticals. They have a that's where the paediatric epilepsy trial is based. It's all around the world. You've got governments here in Australia saying, we're going to legalise medical cannabis by getting some children onto this study that's based out of the US. It's a really substandard product again.
Why do you say that?
Because when you compare it, so it's for Dravet syndrome. Dravet responds to, as we see here in Australia, to low-dose, high-THC cannabis. The Epidiolex is a low dose. It's just a one-to-one product. We know of over a third of the children that have been put onto that study have been taken off by their parents because it either doesn't work or they're on the placebo. So it's a very cruel one as well. But no, it's easy to identify that, you know, this initial wave of pharmaceuticalised cannabinoid medicines are nothing like the medical cannabis being made by high THC cannabis. And, you know, obviously I say that, but there is a lot of variances in doses that are being used.
We're going to stop. It's nearly 4:20. I promised everyone we'd stop by 4:20. So really appreciate you guys hanging in. Know that we'll be around outside for a while and come and talk to anyone more. Ask Andrew hard questions about his business interests. And thanks for being here, Woody.
No, thanks,
He's
Michael.
busy,
Michael puts these things on. Look, he's...
And Sista.
And Sista. But Michael, you know, he's the real stalwart behind what we do here.
Yeah, I'm stubborn. I'm not giving up.
Yeah, no. And that's the other thing. We've always adopted, like, we're not going away. We're just going to keep plugging away on this. We've seen the public servants, lots of them come and go. I think this is our 12th health minister, Greg Hunt. You know, they just come and go.
Their staff are the problem. Yeah. The staff stay there, and the pharmaceutical industry have got the staff.
Yeah,
that's what I think's going on.
They're political. They're the staff. They're the staff that get paid more than the minister.
They're the minders, mate.
Yeah. Vote for the Australian Hemp Party.
We'll take your vote. Yeah.
And you could be a health minister.
But yeah, no, what Michael does as the president of the Hemp Embassy and the Hemp Party is very, very important. He's been doing it for a long time, and it really, it sort of gives impetus to what we do here. And it's not just, and it's because we're based in Nimbin, but you're really, you know, having these types of public affairs and public functions and Mardi Gras is what really gets the word out. And slowly, you know,
we're winning.
And people
we're not the mad hippies we used to be, are we? You know, Oh, they're medical cannabis users. Okay, we get it now.
Yeah. I think the real madness about you guys is that you're crazy because you're persistent. You're persistently trying to...
Anything else going on? No, we've got nothing else to do.
Yeah. I'm just furious about... I'm furious about the drug war. Furious about the suffering it causes. Yeah. And, you know, the lives don't worry about saving lives, because we don't really die, I think. We might drop this body. But the suffering we could stop by allowing medical cannabis is huge. And the side benefits of the enlightenment, the spiritual edge, they're terrified, mate. You know, the old story, you know, you don't want to run out of weed, it's better to run out of money. They hate that, they're scared of that, I can tell you. Because it makes you think differently, cannabis, and probably that's why a lot of us came to live around Nimbin, try and live closer to the earth, and do all those ideas we got often inspired by cannabis, organic food, permaculture, health food, you know, looking after each other and the earth. So thanks to Andrew, but especially thanks to Sista for everybody, for her. She's a winner. Thank you for being here.
Come to our next one, though. October.
Yeah. October. Thanks, everyone.
Good idea.
Thanks, guys. That's good.